late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn of St. Mary's Cathedral. Sarah Chen adjusted her simple gray dress one more time, clutching her 6-month-old son Tommy against her chest. The baby's soft breathing was the only thing keeping her calm as she stood at the edge of the wedding crowd. She shouldn't have come. Every rational part of her mind had screamed against it. But when she received the invitation to Marcus's wedding, something deep inside her needed closure. 3 years ago, Marcus had been her everything. They had planned their own wedding, picked out baby names, dreamed of growing old together. Then the pregnancy test changed everything. "I'm not ready for this," Marcus had said, his face pale as he stared at the 2 pink lines. "I thought we had more time." Sarah had given him space, thinking he just needed to adjust. Instead, she found out through social media that he was dating someone else, someone who didn't come with the complications of an unplanned pregnancy. Now, watching Marcus stand at the altar in his perfectly tailored black tuxedo, Sarah felt the familiar ache in her chest. His bride, Victoria, looked radiant in her flowing white gown. The cathedral's Gothic arches framed them beautifully, creating a fairy tale scene that Sarah had once imagined for herself. Tommy stirred in her arms, making a small sound. A few guests turned to look, and Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She had positioned herself at the very back, hoping to remain invisible. She just wanted to see Marcus happy, to put this chapter of her life to rest. But as the ceremony progressed, more heads began to turn. Whispers rippled through the crowd like water through stones. Sarah recognized some of Marcus's family members, their faces showing a mixture of surprise and disapproval. She had loved these people once, had imagined Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings with them. "Is that Sarah?" she heard Marcus's aunt whisper to her husband. "What is she doing here?" The whispers grew louder. Tommy, sensing the tension, began to fuss. Sarah tried to quiet him, swaying gently, but the damage was done. The entire back section of the cathedral was now focused on her instead of the ceremony. Marcus's mother, Eleanor, turned around with a look that could freeze fire. She whispered something sharp to Marcus's father, who immediately stood up and began walking toward Sarah. "You need to leave," he said in a low, firm voice when he reached her pew. "This is neither the time nor the place." "I'm not causing any trouble," Sarah whispered back, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted to—" "You wanted to what? Create a scene? This is my son's wedding day." His voice was getting louder despite his attempts to keep it quiet. More guests were turning now. Sarah could feel hundreds of eyes on her, judging her, wondering what drama she might bring to this perfect day. Her face felt hot with shame and anger. She had every right to be here. The invitation had her name on it after all, but Tommy was crying now, his small voice echoing off the cathedral's stone walls. The beautiful ceremony was grinding to a halt because of her presence. "Please," Marcus's father said, his hand now on her arm, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." Sarah looked toward the altar and saw Marcus had turned around. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded cathedral. She saw something flicker across his face, guilt, perhaps, or regret. But then Victoria touched his arm, and he turned, back to face the minister. That small gesture broke something inside Sarah. She stood up, Tommy still crying in her arms, and began to make her way toward the exit. The walk down the aisle felt endless. Every step was accompanied by whispers and stares. She felt like she was being paraded through town in stocks, her shame on display for everyone to see. Just as she reached the cathedral doors, a deep voice spoke behind her. "Excuse me, miss, you dropped this." Sarah turned to see a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit. He had kind eyes and silver hair that caught the light streaming through the stained glass windows. He was holding out a small blanket, Tommy's favorite blue one that she hadn't even realized had fallen. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the blanket with trembling hands. The man looked at her with genuine concern. "Are you all right? You look like you could use some fresh air." Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. The man, she didn't recognize him from the wedding party, gently placed his hand on her shoulder and guided her outside. The cool evening air was a relief after the suffocating atmosphere inside. "I'm James," he said once they were outside. "James Morrison. I'm Victoria's uncle." Sarah's heart sank. Great, she thought. Even the bride's family was coming to escort her away. But James surprised her. "I couldn't help but notice what happened in there. That was unkind." "I shouldn't have come," Sarah said, bouncing Tommy gently as his cries began to subside. "I thought I could handle it, but—" "Everyone deserves closure," James said simply, "and everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. The sounds of the ceremony resumed inside, the minister's voice carrying through the thick doors, the rustle of fabric as guests settled back into their seats. "He's beautiful," James said, looking at Tommy with a gentle smile. "How old?" 6 months, Sarah replied. "His name is Tommy." James nodded thoughtfully. "My daughter was about that age when my wife left me. Single parenting isn't easy." Sarah looked at him in surprise. She had expected judgment, not understanding. "The thing about moments like this," James continued, "is that they feel like the end of the world. But they're usually just the end of one chapter. The next one might be even better." As if to prove his point, Tommy looked up at James and smiled, his first real smile at a stranger. James chuckled, and the sound was warm and genuine. "You know," James said, "I own a small marketing firm downtown. We've been looking for someone with your background. Victoria mentioned you were in communications before the baby came." Sarah stared at him in shock. How did you know?" "Small world. Plus, Victoria's not as bad as that scene in there made it seem. She actually speaks very highly of you." Inside the cathedral, the ceremony was reaching its climax. Sarah could hear the minister asking for the rings, could imagine Marcus sliding the band onto Victoria's finger. The life she had once dreamed of was officially becoming someone else's reality. But standing here with James, holding her son in the warm evening air, Sarah realized something had shifted. The desperate need for closure she had felt was being replaced by something else, possibility. Tommy cooed happily in her arms, and James smiled at him again. "Think about the job offer," James said, pulling out a business card. "And remember, endings are just beginnings in disguise." As the cathedral doors opened and the wedding party began to emerge, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months, hope for the future.